Welcome to the Nephilim Podcast, where... How you doing, Colin? What's up?
I'm doing great. The Nephilim, however you want to say it.
Hopefully you're familiar.
If you don't know about the Nephilim,
Get your head out of the rock. The ground?
You definitely never heard about it in Sunday school. This is like, they always just gloss over these verses.
Because they don't want to answer the hard questions.
But here on this podcast, we're going to get into it. And I'm excited. I love the Nephilim.
Biblical questions without a lot of answers are very interesting.
Yes. But I do think there are very
There's answers.
I don't think it's like crystal clear.
No, not at all.
But I do think there is a clear, quote unquote, correct view.
I agree.
I think there is a quote biblical view to view the Nephilim, and let's just start by I told you, let's just throw out aliens. Like that's not that's not a good that's not a good take at all.
It's a cop out.
Like if you think the Nephilim are aliens, you're wrong. Sorry. Not sorry. You're just wrong.
Yep.
At least like I rather you have the angel human hybrid take.
Yes.
Which I also think is wrong, but we'll get into that one because that's probably the second most popular, or actually probably the most popular view. At least that view like is popular. Aliens is like the least popular option.
It's a pagan view,
and it's just
everyone believes in aliens.
There's no scriptural backing anywhere in the Bible to support extraterrestrial life, whether you believe it's there or not. Whatever, there's no backing in scripture, so let's just throw it out. Nephilim. What a nice. I don't know where you and I probably have different views. We've never actually talked about the Nephilim.
Yes, I can promise you we have different views, but I do believe that there is a right way to view it.
And so this is going to be an interesting episode for sure. Do we want to just start by kind of laying out our view?
Yeah. You go first.
Why do I have to go first?
I don't know.
You go first. I always go first.
Okay, so I would definitely hold more to the idea that they're not a hybrid. Should we maybe start with the scripture, the two scriptures? I think starting with scripture is the best way to do this.
Let's read Genesis 6. Let's do verses
1 through 4?
1 through 8.
1 through 8? Okay.
Because I need 1 through 8 for my view.
Oh, okay. More scripture.
Actually,
you're so holy.
Genesis 3 all the way through, but we're just going to read 8 verses. I have the NIV open. I want the ESV. Do you have the ESV open?
I have the ESV.
Why don't you go?
I have the ESV 1 through 4. Let me just.
You don't have 4, 5, 6, 8. The technical difficulties.
I know. It's so sad.
No, it's not technical difficulties. It's just us not being prepared, apparently.
Yeah.
Come on. Where is it? I could have switched my Bible translation faster than this. Any day now. How you doing, audience? I hope you're having a great day. And I hope that you have opinions on the Nephilim. And if you don't, then I'm going to give you opinions.
Ooh. Okay. 1 through 8.
Okay. 1 through 8.
Okay. When man began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of man were attractive, and they took as their wives any they chose. Then the Lord said, My spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh. His days shall be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, where the sons of God came into the daughters of man, and they bore children in them. These were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart were only evil and continually. And the Lord regretted that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart. So the Lord said, I will blot out man, whom I have created from the face of the land, man and animals and creeping things, and birds of heaven, for I am sorry that I have made them. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord.
There's the scripture. What a beautiful...
You want to read the Numbers one too? I don't have that reference.
Yeah. The Nephilim are mentioned in Numbers 15, I believe. No, 13. 13, 32, and 33. Numbers 13, 32, and 33. So they brought to the people of Israel a bad report of the land, and they saw that they had spied out, saying, "The land through which we have gone to spy it out, it is a land that devours its inhabitants, and the people that we saw in it were of great height. And there we saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak, who came from the Nephilim, and we seemed to ourselves like grasshoppers, and so we seemed to them." That's the Numbers reference, which is important if you hold to that the Nephilim are giants. But I'm sure I'll get into that later.
Yeah.
So what's your take, Isaac?
Okay, so I would say that I definitely would hold to the more popular view of them being the human demon hybrid. The idea that they are giants, and that when we see extra special people in scripture, even, I mean, I think it's a pretty normal view that, like, was it Jericho? Not Jericho. The spot where the spies went and they saw giants. Yeah, that was at Jericho.
That's what I just read in Numbers.
Yeah. That
was somebody spying out the promised land.
Yeah, the promise. Yes. Okay. That idea of those being Nephilim would be my take. That's a very common view, not very specific, with and a very literal view of just reading the scripture.
My view is not as easy to just sum up in a few sentences.
And now I'm going to fully say that's kind of the cop-out view. It's kind of this is just what I believe because it doesn't matter.
My goal now just became to convince you.
Yes, please do.
I have a better take. My take would be that the Nephilim are in fact not actually a result of the offspring of the sons of God and the daughters of man. They are not a result of that. They are something different. They are men of renown, which is possible.
Renown.
Yeah, so it's possible that it's from the renown could mean they're righteous or unrighteous. If they're righteous, it's possible they came from Seth's line, and if they're unrighteous, it's possible they came from Cain's line. But I would say that Nephilim were great warriors, either righteous or unrighteous. I would tend to lean that they're unrighteous, and that they were perpetrators of violence, and they connect the escalation of violence that is in verses 11 through 13 of chapter 6. I think in the view that right after this passage, we get the flood.
Yes.
And right before this passage, we get two genealogies. So we start in chapter 3. We get the curse, the result of the fall, and there is set up kind of this tale of two stories. There's the offspring of the woman and the offspring of the serpent.
Yes.
Right? And then in chapter 4, we get Cain and Abel, but then we also get the genealogy of Cain.
Yes.
Then in chapter 5, we get the genealogy of Seth.
Okay.
Who is Abel's replacement.
Yes.
And then we end chapter 5 with the birth of Noah.
Yes.
This kind of like spark, this kind of like hopeful ray. So how then do we go from kind of this hopeful, like this the promise is coming true through Seth? How do we go from there to the world is so wicked we need a flood?
Yes.
That's where I believe verses 1 through 8 come in play. It's connecting from how do we go from kind of being hopeful with Seth's genealogy to the world is so wicked we need to flood it.
Yes.
That being said,
is there a determined number of years between that? Because I know the genealogy says that, he had kids after he had Shem, Ham, and Japheth after 500 years or whatever. But what period of time was that from Noah to the flood, or chapter 5 to chapter 6? I guess.
So that's a great question.
I don't think we have a number on that.
No, and a lot of times this does throw us off. But chapter 6 is a flowing from chapter 5.
Yes,
There's not
very
a, like,
much so.
chapter 5 ends and now we open chapter 6.
Yeah.
It's 5 flows directly into 6.
With verses 1 through 8.
We lose that. Well, Genesis is just one continuous story.
Yes.
At this point, and we lose that when we kind of put the chapters in there.
Yes, very much so.
But if it is one continuous story, which I think it's accepted that it is,
Definitely.
We kind of. The question is, it says, right, the Nephilim were on the earth in those days. What does it really mean by those days?
Yeah.
Does it mean Noah's days? Does it mean the entire genealogy of Seth and Cain? What exactly does it mean?
Yes.
I would tend to say that it was during the entire genealogy, because I have a very connected view that 4, 5, and 6 are all basically one story. And it's important to know where we came from and where we're going. And knowing we're getting the flood, and there's plenty I could say on why we need the flood. But what is interesting is one of the stated reasons is because the sons of God and the daughters of men were marrying.
Yes.
That is one of the stated reasons for the flood.
Do you separate Nephilim from the sons of God?
Yes.
Okay. How?
So if you look at chapter 4.
Yes. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days. Oh, chapter 6.
Chapter 6, verse 4.
Yeah.
I think I said chapter 4.
That's okay.
Then the Lord said, "My spirit shall not abide in man forever, and for he is flesh, his days shall be 120 years." Right? And then verse 4 says, the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterwards, when the sons of God came into the daughters of man, and they bore children to them. The Nephilim kind of feels more of an aside. When I read it all the way through, it's kind of like, here's a story, and then randomly here's this like half verse where we talk about the Nephilim. To me, there's no correlation between the Nephilim being the offspring of the sons of God and the daughters of man. That's how I read it. I don't see. It says Nephilim are also existing during this time where there's this intermarriage. But we need to answer the question: who are the sons of God?
Yes.
And
very big question.
Very big question. And again, if we look at chapter 3 and chapter 4 and chapter 5, this offspring, this promise God made to Eve, that you shall have an offspring that will crush the serpent's offspring, sets up 2 lines. And what's interesting, in chapter 4, Eve says when she gives birth to Cain, I got my promise.
Yes.
She says she got it. Whereas when Seth is born, she says, now God has given me.
Okay.
What's important about that is when the Bible talks about Cain, it's very much set up. He is evil. He will succumb to evil. He is the embodiment of evil. He is the descendant of the serpent.
Yes.
Okay, we're on board there.
Yep, I agree.
Seth is the descendant of the woman.
Yes.
And so we have the 2 lines. We have the offspring of the woman in Seth, and the offspring of the serpent in Cain. And then chapter 4 and 5 are given the genealogies for how we get from there to the flood. And what's always kind of been interesting to me, why is Cain's genealogy in there? It sticks out. Nowhere else in Scripture do we get a genealogy that's not directly a part of
Adam
Christ's
to Seth. Yeah.
genealogy.
Yes.
That's the only one. It is Cain. Maybe I'm missing one, but that's the only one I can think of.
Yeah.
So it's important.
I can't think of another one either.
And it sets up who are the sons of God. Seth's descendants are the son of God because they are the promise given to Eve of her offspring. So that's who the sons of God are.
Okay.
And the sons of man, or the daughters of man in this case, are Seth or are Cain's descendants. Right?
Yep.
Not too big of a jump that I'm making there.
I don't think so.
So, taking into account chapter 4 and 5, the 2 genealogies, we have the sons of God, who are Seth's descendants, which includes Noah. And then we have the sons of man and the daughters of man, who are Cain's descendants.
Mhm.
And here in chapter 6, we see this intermarriage between them.
Yes.
And I want to
So
make
godly men and evil women.
the heirs to the promise and the heirs to destruction.
So Cain's women.
Yes.
Okay. I'm fine. I'm tracking.
Cain's women,
This makes sense.
Seth's sons.
Yep.
They intermarry.
Okay.
And it's an important distinction to make. It says, where is it? Chapter 2, the sons of God saw that the daughters of man were attractive,
Mhm.
and they took as their wives. This was not a one-time encounter.
Mm-hmm.
This was not some sort of assault. The took there is a taking on as the wife.
Mhm.
That's important for when I actually get to points against the angels. They took them as wives.
Mhm.
And so you see this compromise of the promise, where we have the promises happening through Seth. We have Noah. We have this big bright spot in chapter 5. And now we hit to chapter 6. How do we get from that bright spot to destruction?
Mhm.
Well, the compromise has been corrupted. The sons of God have compromised and taken wives they shouldn't have taken.
Mhm.
And the language here, I think, should make us think about Genesis.
Mm.
Eve saw that the fruit was good and then took
Yes.
and ate. Chapter 6, verse 2. The sons saw that the daughters of men were attractive or good.
Mhm.
Then they took,
Mhm.
and then they ate or became wives.
And they fell.
Exact same order
Mhm.
as Eve's fall. I think that's significant.
Yes.
And so we see this compromise of how we go from godly men and the promise being on track
Mhm.
to God needs to flood the world. That's where I'm at with what the sons of God are and what the daughters of man are.
Mhm.
Any rebuttals?
I don't know. I think it makes sense. It definitely makes sense. I like how you draw parallels from the past. But let me pull up. What is it? I think it's 1 Peter. Yeah. This was one of the verses that I had found for reference, that the idea that the Nephilim were fallen angels, which we've kind of talked more about the sons of God,
Mm-hmm.
which yes, when it comes to Nephilim and sons of God being separate,
Mm-hmm.
I definitely think that's probably true. But let me read this for you. I thought this was interesting. So 1 Peter 3:18-22. For Christ also suffered once for sin, the righteousness for the unrighteous, that he might bring us to God, being put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the spirit, in which he went and proclaimed to the spirits in prison, because they formerly did not obey, when God's patience waited in the days of Noah, while the ark was being prepared, in which a few, that is, 8 persons, were brought safely through water. Baptism, which corresponds to this, now saves you, not by the removal of dirt from the body, but in appearance to God, through the resurrection of Jesus Christ, who has gone into heaven and is at the right hand of God, with angels, authorities, and powers having been subject to him. So I think when he's talking about spirits, he's definitely talking about evil spirits in that connotation. The idea that evil spirits were the reason for the flood, and I think that does pull a little bit more to fallen angels put in prison of the earth, the idea of falling from heaven, rather than the idea of it just being godly people who messed up. If that makes sense.
Yeah. I would interpret that passage. I need to read it more. But my quick 2 cents would be, my first thought, because we're talking about resurrection, would be that the spirits are dead people, and their spirits are in Sheol, and they're the unrighteous spirits are the ones who were not saved. And those are the spirits it's talking about.
Mhm.
And those go all the way back to the time of Noah. But let me give you some food for thought.
Yes.
One, the idea of the Nephilim being hybrids, quote unquote, of demons and humans comes from the idea that sons of God is a phrase used in scripture to reference angels.
Yes.
That's where we get angels in 6.
Because it is used other places to refer
Yes.
to angelic beings. Yes.
However, the majority of the time, or more often than not, sons of God simply means humans. Yes, there are cases that it refers to angels, but more times it's used as just a reference for man or mankind. As well as, I don't know if it was out there, the original readers of Genesis did not have the rest of the scripture.
This is true.
And so they had to read this in context of Genesis,
Yes.
not in context of what Jeremiah or Ezekiel are going to say about the sons of God.
I agree with that.
And so that
Yes.
we can't really use, yes, we can use other parts of the Bible to help us interpret things, but I don't think that's the case, because more often than not, sons of God simply means mankind, and simply means the people of God.
Okay.
Also, I just want to throw a couple more things out there. Genesis chapter 1 emphasizes 10 times it emphasizes that everything in God's creation reproduces after its kind. That means humans reproduce with humans.
Yes.
Not with angels.
Yep.
That's emphasized 10 times in Genesis 1. That's a stupid amount. Also, I like that you bring up spirit, because I want to bring this up.
Yep.
Angels are spirit beings.
Yes.
Right?
I don't know if they can have sexual intercourse.
That's what I'm getting at.
I don't know.
Angels are not material.
No.
And being seen, an angel being seen by special provision, is one thing. Being touched is another thing. I don't know if we have an exact... I don't think we ever have a human touching an angel.
Can you hug an angel? Yeah.
We have a couple times where angels might have touched humans, like when they stopped Moses from killing...
Yes.
Not Moses. Abraham from killing Isaac.
Yes. Yep.
But that's another thing. Again, very rare. It's yet another thing to have reproductive organs.
Which, doesn't Jesus even say that? I think I had that written down somewhere. I'm not quite sure on this. Yes. Matthew 22:30. Let me look it up.
Yeah, I have that note too.
For in the resurrection they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like angels in heaven. Maybe the idea that
no. So how I read that, or let me finish last. So right, being touched is one thing, having reproductive organs is another thing, and taking a human wife is still another thing. Right, verse 2 it says took. That's a marriage. We've been over that.
Yep.
Matthew 22:30. This goes to the idea that nothing that we know about angels inclines us to even think that there's a real possibility they could marry humans.
This is true.
Matthew 22:30. In the resurrection, they, being human, neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like angels in heaven. I read that as they're not going to marry because they're like the angels.
Yes.
They are not going to marry. And right, your rebuttal is probably, well, these are fallen angels.
Yes. Well, not quite that amount, but yes. How it happened, I don't know how that works, because I don't know how angels work, because they don't reproduce. God made a number of them. They don't die and they don't reproduce. So how that works is definitely someone saying, "Oh, well, they're fallen angels." That's a dumb argument. Yep.
But that would be because if these humans in Matthew 22 are like angels, they're not marrying nor given in marriage, which means there's nothing in Scripture that would even incline us to think that there's a possibility at all that humans could marry angels.
Okay. I'm not changing my thoughts, but let me just give another perspective. How would you feel about the idea of, because we were talking about godly men and evil women, for sake of a worse word,
Sure.
Cain's descendants with Seth's descendants.
Mm-hmm.
How would you feel about the idea of evil spirits embodying the bodies of men to make them make such a bad decision?
Possible.
Because I could get behind that, I think.
I think that's
I don't think they have to be fallen angels, but we know a lot about demon possession and those types of things. So inadvertently,
I don't know if it's possession.
it could work. Well, I'm not saying necessarily
I think
possession,
of
but
John.
it's an easy word to say.
I mean, in fact, our pastor just preached on this a couple of weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
But the idea of the spirit of the Antichrist, John says it like 3 or 4 times throughout his writings. And
Very
the
interesting.
idea is that it's deception, and that is people inside the church that are being deceived by the spirit of the Antichrist. I think that's 100% what's happening. These sons of God are being deceived by something.
Yes.
To think that the daughters of man are good for the taking.
Yes.
However, in the context of Genesis, these sons of God are heirs to the promise, and
This is true. Yep.
They are rejecting God's authority and rejecting the promise of God to marry these women. That's the sin.
Mm.
And again, in context from this passage, takes us from a ray of hope with Noah being born to the flood. What happened? This is what happened. The sons of God marry the daughters of man. And so God had to destroy the world and effectively start over with Noah.
Yes.
Where did I put it? I think I wrote it down. I find it interesting that after the flood, please tell me I wrote it down. I don't think I wrote it down. After the flood, God still talks about how humans are totally depraved, and how they're still going to go after their heart.
Yes.
And so the flood didn't fix the problem at all.
No.
I mean that's known.
No, we got to restart.
But it was clear that the sin grieved God. And that's important for us today to know. Yes.
Hashtag total depravity.
Our sin grieves God. And so it's not like he's not indifferent to sin. And in the words of David Mathis, which is actually where I got most of these notes.
Heck yeah.
To take sin lightly is to take God lightly. God's willing. He's able to help us overcome sin. But our sin grieves God, and there has to be a punishment. There has to be justice. So that's where the flood comes in. And again, a stated reason for the flood is this intermarriage. Yes. Which makes sense because they are defiling the promise God gave Eve. And they are breaking this promise. So it makes sense that God would flood the earth because of it. But so you're with me with the sons of God being...
I'm with you with the sons of God being Seth, and I'm with you with the daughters being Cain, and that makes perfect sense for why the genealogies are there, and I like the parallels between Adam and Eve and how that all works. But I would say that which we haven't really talked about Nephilim at all, but I think there is definitely a point of, whether you want to call it possession or indwelling, of a fallen angel that takes place in this situation.
See, but again, the Nephilim are not the result of this marriage.
Say more.
So verse, let's just read this again.
Yep.
When I get to 4, I'm going to emphasize.
Okay.
When man became to multiply on the face of the land, and the daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of man were attractive, and they took as their wives as they chose.
Yes.
Then the Lord said, My spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh, his days shall be 120.
Yes.
The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterwards, when the sons of God came into the daughters of man, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men of old, and the men of woman.
So in my mind, the aside is when the sons of God and that's like the and that.
But we're already talking about the sons of God in verses 1, 2, 3. We're talking about the sons of God.
Yes.
And the daughters of
So
man.
then, what is a Nephilim?
And then just randomly in verse 4,
It's
out of
just
nowhere,
like
we're like the Nephilim were on the
because
earth
when
in
it
those
when it
days.
talks about the mighty men, that's talking about the Nephilim.
No, that's talking about the offspring of the man and woman,
Okay.
which is different than the Nephilim.
Okay. So then, what's a Nephilim? In your thought process.
I think they are warriors that were unrighteous and that they were perpetrators of violence.
From Cain or Seth?
Doesn't matter.
Okay.
In this,
I think it matters.
I don't think it does.
Okay.
Because again, these verses are just explaining how we go from hope to destruction.
Yes. Yes.
And so one.
But
is
if
the
it matters
promises
with
to
Son
fall.
of Man, it definitely matters with
No.
Nephilim.
Because the Nephilim aren't tied to the promise.
They have to be.
No, the sons of God are tied to the promise. The only reason the sons of daughters or
They
the
have
daughters of
to
man
be.
are brought in are because they marry the sons of God. That's the only reason they're tied to the promise.
Okay.
Is because the sons of God defile the promise.
I guess what I meant by tied to promise is they have to either come from Seth or Cain. Or are they like some, in your thought, the jumbled mix of like renegades from all of it?
Maybe.
Okay.
but
So there's no
even-
supernaturalness
No.
of a Nephilim.
No.
They're just a weird side quest.
They're okay. One another thing. Let's say that the mighty men are the Nephilim.
Okay. Yep.
Let's go there. Which I might. I might actually agree with that.
I think if you read it, that's how it reads.
Sure. But these men are not the offspring. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of man and they bore children to them.
Pause. These talking about the
talking
Nephilim.
about the Nephilim,
Yeah.
not the offspring.
Yeah. Now,
Do you count that?
I agree with you that it's not the offspring.
Okay. Let's say
Yes.
that the Nephilim are these.
When you're talking about these.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. These were mighty men who were of old,
Yep.
the men of renown.
Okay. What does renown mean to you? When you're talking the men of renown.
They're
Just well known.
well known.
Okay.
Which does make me think that they came from the lineage of either Seth in chapter 5 or of Cain in chapter 4. Because again, this is one story.
Yep. It's kind of the only two options.
But they are men. They're not some hybrid. They're men. It says men twice. That's significant.
Yes.
And men of renown, right? Again, I would say that you go two places with this.
Mhm.
They are righteous or they are unrighteous.
Mhm.
I'm going to go with unrighteous.
Okay.
You could say that they are renowned and the Nephilim are descendants of Seth. And they are renowned because they are
Okay.
in fact the men stated between Seth and Noah. Those are the Nephilim. That's a statement you could make.
Say that one more time. The people between Seth and Noah, those are the Nephilim.
Those are in fact the Nephilim.
Okay.
That's why
Okay.
they're named.
The men of old
The men
renown.
of renown.
Okay. So there's nothing special about them.
Well,
Besides their
obviously special,
renown.
They're named.
Okay.
I don't think they're righteous. I would say they're unrighteous, which means maybe they are the people named in Cain's descendants.
Okay.
I don't know if I hold to that, but I think they are unrighteous because I think they are helping paint this picture of how we go from this ray of hope with Noah to everyone in the world is wicked and we need to flood the earth. Part of that is the one true line, the good line, the righteous line of Seth has been tainted by their intermarriage with Cain's descendants. And also we have the Nephilim, who are mighty men, which in my mind, every time I hear mighty men, you think of David's mighty men, I think of warrior.
Yes.
I
Yes.
think they're
Which
great
I
warriors.
don't know if that's an okay comparison. It's definitely not talking about the same thing. Mighty men and
Correct.
mighty men. It's not speaking to the same
Correct.
thing. But if you read about David's mighty men, they were special,
yes,
right? No one could do that sort of thing. So the way you're talking, we were saying how you would say there's nothing necessarily special about a Nephilim, right? They're just
Yes.
a man of renown. These people were like juiced. I don't know for a better word.
I can agree that they.
Okay.
I would say they are great warriors.
Okay.
I would say they're unrighteous.
Which one for clarification?
The Nephilim are
The
unrighteous.
the Nephilim are unrighteous. Okay, so from Cain.
Yeah.
Okay.
Whether those are exactly the people listed in chapter 4,
Yeah.
I don't know. Don't care. Doesn't matter.
No.
But they are unrighteous, great warriors that are sowing violence.
Okay.
Because again, they're warriors.
Yep.
They're going to war with people. They're successful at it.
Okay.
And they are creating the world, and creating this violence that is now perpetrating throughout all of humanity.
Okay. So would you consider the very common belief, I don't know if I believe this, but the idea that Goliath would be a Nephilim?
So that takes me back to Numbers.
Okay. The idea of them being
13.
giants,
So
good warriors.
That comes from Numbers 13.
Okay.
The only other time the Nephilim are named.
Yes.
Verse 32, right? The spies are, the Israeli spies are scouting the land for the promised land.
Mm-hmm.
And they say this: the land through which we have gone to spy is a land that devours its inhabitants, and all the people that we saw in it are of great height.
Mm-hmm.
And there we saw the Nephilim, or Nephilim.
Sounds like there's two separate people.
Yes, that's what I'm getting at.
Okay.
So the first group is giants.
Yes.
In the land.
Big boys.
And then we also saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak,
mm-hmm.
who came from the Nephilim. I'm guessing that the little came from the Nephilim means roughly they came from the same idea from Genesis chapter 6. Obviously, they can't be the same people.
I agree with you. I don't think they're the same people. Okay. Yep. Keep going. Sorry.
Which would then make me think that this is now just a word for unrighteous, mighty warriors.
Okay.
That's kind of where I get from 33.
And the only place that I would disagree with you with is the idea that what makes them mighty is their unrighteousness with evil spirit. Some sort of demon possession, fallen angelness that goes in them. That would be. I think we've gotten down to where we would disagree. That's where I would disagree with you.
There's nothing in me, nothing in that I've seen
mm-hmm.
that would hint to that. And in fact, there are plenty of mighty warriors throughout Scripture history, more so than not, that are not possessed.
I don't think you could prove that.
If they were possessed,
but I couldn't prove that they were either.
If they were, God would definitely say something. There are cases where God straight up says this person was possessed, right?
Okay.
And a lot of times, those people are not mighty at all. Think of the demons in the New Testament.
Okay.
They're powerful. They have control of that person. Think of when Jesus cast out the demon into the pigs and they all go jump off the cliff.
Yeah. Yeah.
That man was not a mighty warrior.
No.
That man was struggling.
Yeah.
That man was hurting.
Yes.
When I think a human is being possessed by a powerful demon, he's not going to just go out and be of clear mind and be able to defeat hundreds of people.
Yes.
Because he's going to be shriveling up.
Mm-hmm. And I think that would be more on the spirit's will, right? I think a demon can ruin you or a demon can help you. Help you. That sounds really like I'm down for that. But I don't think it's outside of a demon's power to be like, hey, let's do some crazy stuff in the Old Testament.
Maybe. But again, I don't know. When I read Genesis 6,
mm-hmm.
the sons of God are not angels. And that the idea that the Nephilim are mm-hmm. this offspring of angels and human mm-hmm. comes from the idea that the sons of God are humans.
Yes.
And we've gotten to the point where we agree that the sons of God are just Seth's descendants.
I that makes sense.
And
that
so
makes perfect sense.
The Nephilim now has no real backing for the idea that they are angelic at all.
Because the only reason they would be is if the sons of God were angelic.
Yes.
Okay.
That's your only real connection between angels and the Nephilim, or mm-hmm. if you think the sons of God means angels, which it is referenced later in Scripture.
Yes. Which, I mean, I don't know. I feel like I could go either way on that.
Sons of God are 100% Seth's descendants.
Yeah, I like the idea of Seth's descendants.
I think it
because
makes
I think
sense.
The angel breaks down as soon as you're talking about marriage.
Yes,
you know, because it's like that's not how that works.
Jesus himself was like, that's not how it works.
Yeah, unless this is a little weird. This just popped in my head, but the same idea of how God put Jesus in Mary, right? There's nothing sexual about that. The idea of the angel doing the same thing
But again,
to a
I
woman.
know this.
I don't know if that's possible.
I want to know. It's not a one-time event. It is marriage.
Yes.
In Genesis chapter 6, verse 2, it says they took them as their wives.
Yes.
It's marriage. It's not a one-time. If it was a one-time event, I could totally get on board with it was similar
Some sort.
to the idea of the virgin conception, even though that's completely heretical to say.
Yes, it's very heretical to say,
every
which is why I don't know if I should.
Just got really mad.
Yep.
But again, it's not a one-time thing. It's a continual. They are wives, and I don't see angels being able to do that because Jesus himself says so in Matthew 22:30,
Yes.
Mark 12:25, and Luke 20:34 through 36. All three of the synoptic gospels.
And even the idea, I'm arguing against myself now. This is kind of fun.
Yeah, I know.
The idea of evil spirits were everywhere, right? So if they were influencing the sons of men to do this sort of thing, just because they're influencing, whether that's indwelling, possession, or just like the passing thought through someone's head, that doesn't then go on to the children. Like that doesn't go to the children and it's like, oh, they're Nephilim. I think it is pretty. I like the idea that the Nephilim are not the descendants of the Son of Man.
Yes. You just made me think of that. I should have thought about this way earlier. But I think why it can't be demons.
Okay.
I'm trying to find this in my notes that I've already thrown together.
I still think fallen angels have something to do with this.
Here's why. The flood was a result of man's sin.
Yes.
And so, it doesn't make sense for God to punish man based on demons' intervention.
Which you could argue that the fall of man was demon intervention.
It was not. You can't argue that. The fall of man was man's choice to rebel against God.
Yes, which I agree with, but for the sake of this,
no, not for the sake. That is a. I'm going to say that's a heretical. That
take. Is a heretical take. The idea that that we wouldn't have fallen without Satan's intervention.
That would make God unjust in his punishment of humanity.
I agree.
The fall of Adam and Eve were their own conscious choice because God gave us free will, and they chose to rebel, disobey God, and eat of the fruit.
Yep.
They were punished for their own actions. That's why the curse was given to the serpent, and technically there wasn't a curse given to Adam and Eve. It wasn't really a curse. The curse was to the serpent. God says, I curse you with this. He never says, I curse you to Eve or Adam. He just says, this is what's going to happen.
This is what's going to happen. Yes. Okay. I can follow you.
And so God is just. And so I 100% think when it comes to the sins of humanity for the flood, one, it's the intermarriage. It's the tainting of God's chosen line of Seth, and the Nephilim perpetrating violence, which has to be human decision and human will in order for God to justly punish humans in the flood. If the Nephilim are fallen angels influencing them, God would have to punish the fallen angels, not the human, because it's no longer human's choice. If they are possessed, it is now 100%, because this is how deception works. This is how the Antichrist works. Yeah. This is where the Antichrist will give you a temptation, and then you
make the decision. Yes.
But that is not influenced as the
which is what Satan did.
Yes, and that is not influenced as the way that you've been saying the Nephilim were influenced by.
Indwelling, that sort of thing.
You're much more the idea of their possession.
Yes.
I don't think that could be the case if God is going to wipe out humanity.
Okay.
I think it has to be human decision to rebel against God, and we see that with sons of man, seeing the daughters, taking the daughters. Same way Eve saw the fruit and took the fruit. Same way, and then the Nephilim are then also explaining how the rest of humanity, besides these two descendants, get to the point where God wipes them out. I almost have you convinced. I know I do. Definitely
a thinker. I am not convinced, but something definitely to learn more about.
You'll be there in a few days. We're going long, but I get really passionate about the Nephilim because there's so many takes, and I think
There's
again,
a lot of bad takes out there.
I think these are takes.
These are the only two that I think have some validity, one way or another. And yeah, I think you should definitely have a take one way or another, because I mean, I've heard some crazy stuff of like the sons of God are. I mean, people throw aliens in the Bible. We talked about it. They'll be like, "Oh yeah, they're just aliens. They're like people from different planets." And it's like, no, there's nothing scriptural about that.
And as we close, I think it's important to remember 2 Timothy 3:16. All Scripture is breathed out by God and is profitable. As hard as unclear Genesis 6 may be, it is breathed out by God and it is profitable. And I think it is important to remember what Scripture says about itself. I think we've done a good job staying there, because here we believe in the perspicuity of Scripture.
Absolutely.
That the main things about Scripture are clear.
Yes.
Are crystal clear, and it's a very sad truth that in the church today, many Christians today and throughout church history have paid little careful attention to what God has actually said in Scripture.
Yep.
And so I do think it's important to have a take on this, because we are called to take very careful consideration on the words of God. It's important to remember that these are the words of God, not the words that Moses threw down, or some other author, no matter what you believe, who wrote Genesis. They are the words of God that he has said to us. Email us. Tell us what you think the Nephilim are.
Yeah.
Are you offended that I said aliens are a bad take?
Yes.
Let me know, although you probably clicked off long ago.
May I have one last point?
Absolutely.
I think with points like this, churches split for less than this sort of thing. And I like everything that you said. We need to always go back to the gospel, what God has made clear. But it is very important to understand what God has said. And when you don't fully know, to dig deeper into it. You might be listening to this and be like, I didn't realize that was in Scripture. Go read it. Go figure it out. Go read some commentaries.
It's not in Sunday school class.
No, it's not. But I think a really good main point is this is our total depravityness, but humanity will only fall deeper and deeper into sin, regardless of what we do. And we just have a tendency to run further away from God.
Yep.
And I think I think that's the hope of God coming back. It's pretty cool.
I do think verse 5 in this is like the first real picture into total depravity that we see in Scripture. And then after, there's the verse, Genesis 8:21. I'm not going to go find it, but that's when God, after the flood, says man will always go after his heart, which is always evil. And then Psalms 51:5, Jeremiah 17:9, Romans 3:9-11, Romans 7:18, and Romans 8:7-8. If you really want to look more into total depravity and why Isaac and I totally believe in total depravity, there's a list of verses for you to go read and study the context around them. That's all we have time for today. We're not going to make this longer than a Baptist episode. If you've made it this far, why don't you email the podcast Mighty Men to podcast at Theo-Doxan.org. Link in the description.
Colin, I don't know. What are your view on air conditioners?
Air conditioners they're
really cool.
They're the bane of my existence. They are honestly